Listen carefully, because this is not comforting and it is not gentle, but it is true. The truth about your relationship is not found in how intensely you feel, how long you have stayed, or how much you have sacrificed. It is found in whether the relationship is making you more disciplined, more honest, more courageous, and more capable of carrying the weight of your own life. If your relationship consistently drains your energy, erodes your self-respect, and pushes you toward resentment rather than responsibility, then you are not in love. You are in avoidance. Most people do not fail in relationships because they do not care. They fail because they are unwilling to confront what is wrong while it is still fixable. They trade truth for temporary peace, and that trade always ends in long-term misery. A relationship is not a place to hide from your weaknesses. It is a structure that exposes them. And if you refuse to look at what is being revealed, the structure collapses under the weight of your denial. You must understand this clearly. Love without truth becomes manipulation, commitment without honesty becomes a prison, and loyalty without standards becomes self-betrayal. If you cannot speak plainly about what hurts, what angers you, what you need, and what you refuse to tolerate, then the relationship is already decaying, whether you admit it or not. Every time you stay silent to keep things smooth, you teach your partner that your boundaries are negotiable. And once boundaries disappear, respect follows them into the ground. You are not meant to be endlessly accommodating. You are meant to be precise, truthful, and firm. Ask yourself this without flinching. Are you becoming stronger in this relationship, or are you shrinking to keep it alive? Because anything that requires you to abandon your spine to survive is not love. It is fear wearing a familiar face. A real relationship demands responsibility from both sides, and responsibility is heavy. It requires effort, sacrifice, and the willingness to be judged by reality itself. That is why people avoid it. They would rather blame their partner than examine their own cowardice, rather accuse than improve, rather escape than repair. But here is the brutal truth. If you are not willing to tell the truth, you are not ready for a relationship, because intimacy is built on the courage to reveal what is real, not the talent to perform what is pleasant. Conflict avoided today returns tomorrow with compound interest, and it returns as bitterness, distance, and contempt. If your partner repeatedly dismisses your concerns, ignores your growth, or punishes you for honesty, then you are being trained to lie to yourself, and that training will cost you years of your life. On the other hand, if you are the one avoiding responsibility, if you hide behind excuses, if you demand understanding without earning trust, if you want comfort without effort, then you are the problem you keep running from. A meaningful relationship is a shared pursuit of order against chaos, not a mutual agreement to remain weak. It requires two people who are willing to aim upward, who understand that love is not just affection, but alignment towards something higher than comfort. You do not fix a relationship by demanding change from the other person while refusing to discipline yourself. You fix it by becoming someone whose presence brings clarity instead of confusion, stability instead of drama, and truth instead of noise. Pay attention to what your relationship rewards. If it rewards honesty, growth, and responsibility, nurture it relentlessly. If it rewards manipulation, avoidance, and emotional games, have the courage to step back and tell the truth, even if your voice shakes. Because the cost of speaking is temporary discomfort, but the cost of silence is the slow erosion of your character. Do not confuse endurance with virtue. Staying in what is wrong does not make you noble, it makes you complicit. The purpose of a relationship is not to save you from loneliness, but to help you become someone worthy of respect, your own first and then another's. If you are not becoming that person, then the truth about your relationship is simple, harsh, and unavoidable. Something essential is being neglected, and reality will not let that neglect go unpunished forever. Truth in a relationship is revealed through responsibility, not emotion, and that sentence alone is enough to dismantle most of the lies people tell themselves about love, because emotions are easy, automatic, and fleeting, while responsibility is heavy, deliberate, and enduring, and anything real in your life is built on what you are willing to carry, not on what you momentarily feel. Feelings rise and fall like weather, but responsibility is a choice you make every day to show up honestly, to speak when silence is tempting, to act with integrity when shortcuts are available, and to remain disciplined when excuses are more comfortable. If your relationship is driven only by emotion, it will collapse the moment those emotions shift, because they always do, and when they do, all that remains is the structure you built beneath them. Responsibility is that structure. It is the willingness to be accountable for your words, your actions, your failures, and your growth, instead of outsourcing blame to your partner or hiding behind mood and circumstance. A relationship grounded in responsibility forces you to confront yourself, and that is why so many people avoid it, preferring intensity over depth, drama over stability, and validation over truth. But intensity is not intimacy, and passion without responsibility decays into chaos. Responsibility means you do what needs to be done even when you are tired, misunderstood, or emotionally unsettled. It means you do not weaponize your feelings to justify cruelty, neglect, or avoidance. It means you do not excuse your silence by calling it peace, or your fear by calling it patience. In a responsible relationship, you do not wait for your partner to change before you improve yourself. You understand that leadership begins with self-discipline. You clean up your side of the street before pointing at the mess on theirs. You tell the truth early, not after resentment has fermented into bitterness. You understand that love is not proven by how strongly you react, but by how consistently you act. Responsibility also means boundaries, and boundaries are not punishments, they are definitions of reality. What you tolerate becomes the law of the relationship, and if you tolerate disrespect, dishonesty, or stagnation, you are teaching both yourself and your partner that these things are acceptable. Responsibility demands that you draw clear lines and have the courage to enforce them, even when enforcement risks loss, because a relationship that survives only through self-betrayal is already dead in spirit. When responsibility is absent, people start keeping score, manipulating emotions, testing limits, and avoiding accountability. And slowly the relationship turns into a battlefield of unspoken expectations and unmet needs. But when responsibility is present, clarity replaces confusion. Each person knows what is expected, what is required, and what will not be ignored. This does not make the relationship cold, it makes it stable. Stability is not boring, it is the foundation that allows trust to grow. Responsibility also means accepting that your partner is not there to complete you, rescue you, or absorb the consequences of your immaturity. They are there to walk beside you, not carry you. If you expect emotional reassurance without personal effort, understanding without honesty, or commitment without contribution, you are not seeking love, you are seeking shelter from your own responsibilities. And shelters eventually collapse under the weight of those who refuse to stand. A responsible relationship challenges you. It exposes your weaknesses, your selfish habits, your avoidance patterns, and your unresolved wounds, not to shame you, but to force you to mature. If your relationship never requires growth, it is not love, it is comfort, and comfort without growth breeds decay. Responsibility means you choose long-term meaning over short-term relief. You address problems when they are small instead of dramatic. You listen to understand, not to win. You regulate your reactions because you understand that emotional outbursts are not honesty, they are lack of control. Responsibility is what transforms love from a feeling into a force that can withstand time, pressure, and suffering. Without it, relationships become transactional, fragile, and exhausting. With it, they become arenas of mutual strengthening, where two people take turns being strong when the other is weak, not because they are obligated, but because they have chosen to carry that weight together. In the end, the truth about your relationship is not found in how passionately you argue or how intensely you reconcile, but in how reliably you take responsibility for who you are becoming inside it. If it makes you more disciplined, more truthful, and more capable of facing reality, it is aligned with something real. If it excuses irresponsibility, feeds chaos, and rewards emotional impulsiveness, then no matter how powerful it feels, it is built on sand, and sand never holds under pressure. What you tolerate trains people how to treat you, and that truth is uncomfort. Table, precisely because it places responsibility where most people desperately try to avoid it. back onto themselves. Every relationship you are in is, whether you admit it or not, a living system of rewards and consequences, and whatever behavior you allow to pass without correction becomes the rule rather than the exception. People do not magically discover how to respect you. They learn it by watching what you permit, what you excuse, and what you silently endure. Tolerance is not kindness when it erodes your self-respect. It is self-abandonment disguised as patience. Each time you ignore a boundary violation, laugh off disrespect, or stay silent to keep the peace, you are teaching others that your limits are flexible, negotiable, and ultimately irrelevant. Over time, those lessons harden into habits, and those habits define the relationship more powerfully than any promise or emotion ever could. You must understand this clearly. People respond far more to your standards than to your words. You can talk endlessly about how you want to be treated, but if your actions contradict your speech, reality will side with your actions every time. Tolerating what diminishes you does not make you noble, it makes you predictable. And predictability without standards invites exploitation, not because people are inherently evil, but because human beings naturally move toward what is easiest and least resisted. If there is no cost to mistreating you, mistreatment becomes efficient. This is why resentment grows silently in those who avoid confrontation. They sense the injustice but refuse to correct it, and that unresolved tension turns inward, corroding their character and poisoning the relationship from within. Tolerance, when misused, does not preserve harmony, it postpones collapse. Boundaries are not walls meant to isolate you, they are structures that define where respect begins. Without them, relationships dissolve into chaos, power struggles, and emotional exhaustion. When you fail to draw clear lines, you force others to guess your limits, and people guess low when clarity is absent. What you tolerate today becomes the expectation tomorrow, and expectations once set are brutally difficult to reverse. This is why delayed honesty is so costly. Speaking up early feels uncomfortable, but speaking up late feels like betrayal, both to the other person and to yourself. You cannot demand respect after teaching others that disrespect has no consequences. That demand rings hollow, not because it is wrong, but because it contradicts the reality you helped create. Tolerance also shapes your self-perception. When you repeatedly accept less than you deserve, you begin to believe that less is all you are worth. Your standards do not just educate others, they sculpt your identity. You become the person who endures, who adjusts, who minimizes their needs to maintain proximity, and slowly you confuse endurance with strength. But strength is not the capacity to suffer endlessly. It is the courage to say no when yes would destroy your integrity. A person with no boundaries is not compassionate. They are invisible. Their needs fade into the background. Their voice weakens. And eventually they are valued not for who they are, but for how much they can absorb without complaint. This is not love, it is utility. Healthy relationships are built on mutual correction, not mutual avoidance. They require the willingness to risk discomfort for the sake of truth. When you hold standards, you give others the opportunity to rise. When you tolerate dysfunction, you trap both yourself and the other person at a lower level of being. Discipline in relationships is not cruelty, it is clarity. It says, this is who I am, this is what I allow, and this is where I stand. Clarity creates safety because people know where the lines are, and where lines are clear, resentment has less room to grow. If you fear that enforcing boundaries will drive people away, consider this. Those who leave because you stop tolerating mistreatment were never aligned with your well-being in the first place. Loss in that context is not failure, it is filtration. What remains after standards are enforced is what is real. You cannot build a meaningful life surrounded by people who only stay when you are silent, small, and accommodating. The price of self-respect is the discomfort of confrontation, but the price of avoiding that discomfort is the slow erosion of your soul. In the end, the truth is simple and unforgiving. You teach people every day how to treat you, not through your intentions, but through your tolerances. Choose them carefully because they become the invisible curriculum of your relationships, and whatever you repeatedly allow will eventually define the limits of your life. Avoidance of honest conflict slowly destroys intimacy and respect, And it does so quietly, patiently, without drama, which is why so many people underestimate how lethal it is to a relationship until there is nothing left to save. Conflict does not kill relationships, avoidance does. When truth is withheld to maintain surface-level peace, what actually happens is not peace at all, but a gradual accumulation of unspoken tension, unmet needs, and unresolved resentment. Every time you choose silence over honesty, you trade clarity for comfort, and comfort is a short-term reward that extracts a long-term cost. Intimacy requires truth, and truth requires the courage to confront what is uncomfortable. Without that courage, relationships become polite performances rather than living bonds. You may still share space, routines, even affection, but respect begins to erode because respect is built on the belief that the other person is strong enough to handle reality. When you avoid conflict, you signal, intentionally or not, that either you are too fragile to speak or they are too fragile to hear, and both assumptions poison the foundation of mutual respect. Avoidance creates distance disguised as harmony. The arguments you never have do not disappear. They wait, growing heavier and more complex, until they surface as sarcasm, passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, or sudden explosive confrontations that seem to come out of nowhere. But they never come out of nowhere. They come from months or years of swallowed words. Honest conflict is not cruelty, it is maintenance. Just as a structure requires regular inspection to prevent collapse, a relationship requires confrontation to prevent decay. When you refuse to address small fractures, they become structural failures. People often say they avoid conflict because they care, but what they really care about is avoiding discomfort, and that is not the same thing. Caring means risking tension to protect the truth, not sacrificing the truth to avoid tension. Intimacy is not built by agreeing on everything. It is built by surviving disagreement without deception. When you can argue openly, respectfully, and directly, you prove to each other that the relationship is strong enough to withstand reality. Avoidance, on the other hand, creates an illusion of stability that collapses under the slightest pressure. Over time, the person who avoids conflict begins to feel invisible, unheard, and undervalued, while the other person senses a growing emotional distance they cannot name. This gap widens because what is not spoken cannot be repaired. Respect fades when people sense that honesty has been replaced with appeasement. No one respects a relationship that survives only because one person keeps shrinking themselves. Avoidance also breeds misinterpretation. When concerns are not expressed, assumptions fill the void, and assumptions are almost always harsher than reality. You begin to assign motives, build narratives, and silently judge, all without giving the other person a chance to respond or grow. This internal dialogue becomes more real than the actual relationship, and intimacy is replaced by imagination fueled by resentment. Honest conflict interrupts this process. It brings issues out of the shadows and into the light, where they can be examined, understood, and resolved. It forces both people to take responsibility for their words, their actions, and their impact. Responsibility strengthens respect. Avoidance erodes it. A relationship without conflict is not a sign of maturity. It is often a sign of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen clearly. But intimacy requires being seen clearly, flaws included. If you hide your anger, your disappointment, or your needs, you are not protecting the relationship. You are withholding yourself from it, and a relationship deprived of honesty becomes hollow, no matter how calm it appears. Conflict, when handled properly, is not destructive, it is corrective. It realigns expectations, clarifies boundaries, and reinforces mutual accountability. It says this matters enough to fight for, not flee from. Avoidance says the opposite. This is too fragile to touch. And anything too fragile to touch will eventually break. Respect grows when people see that you are willing to stand your ground without cruelty, to listen without submission, and to speak without fear. Intimacy deepens when both parties know that difficult conversations will be met with engagement rather than withdrawal. Over time, couples who confront honestly develop trust, not because they never disagree, but because disagreement does not threaten the bond. Those who avoid conflict live on borrowed time, mistaking silence for safety. Eventually, the emotional debt comes due, and when it does, it is often paid with detachment, indifference, or sudden endings that shock everyone involved. The truth is unavoidable. Relationships that cannot tolerate honest conflict cannot sustain real intimacy. If you want closeness, you must accept tension. If you want respect, you must risk disagreement. Avoidance feels easier in the moment, but it slowly dismantles the very connection it seeks to preserve. Honest conflict is the price of depth, and depth is the only thing that makes a relationship worth keeping.